Welcome to this explainer. Okay, if you've ever tried to learn a new language, you know it can be a massive undertaking. Today, we're going to look at a total paradigm shift in how we understand the drive to keep learning. We're unpacking Zoltán Dörnyei's groundbreaking research on the L2 Motivational Self System. And listen, this isn't just theory. This is about discovering a psychological superweapon for your own goal setting and unlocking a completely new vision for how you learn. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with 1. The language motivation problem. Then 2. Meet your possible selves. And 3. Ideal, ought, and feared. After that, we'll hit 4. The power of imagination. And finally wrap up with 5. Making your motivation work. All right, part 1. The language motivation problem. Look, anyone who has literally ever stared blankly at a grammar textbook knows the absolute struggle of maintaining motivation over a long, tedious process. So I want to pose this fundamental question to you. What truly drives us to learn a new language over months and years? When that initial excitement inevitably wears off, what keeps you showing up? For decades, researchers thought they had the single definitive answer to this, but the world's kind of changed underneath their feet. For a really long time, the field of language learning was totally dominated by a concept introduced by Robert Gardner back in 1959. It's called integrativeness. Basically, this is the desire to learn a language so you can communicate with and maybe even become like members of a valued target community. The whole idea was that to truly succeed, you had to actually want to integrate into that specific culture. And you can see how this works in Gardner's socio-educational model of second language acquisition. Notice how integrativeness is sitting right there as a core variable. I mean, for nearly 5 decades, this was basically viewed as the central engine firing up your motivated behavior. It assumed that your ultimate goal was to identify with the people who natively spoke the language you were studying. But honestly, here is where that theory hits a massive brick wall today. Think about learning French in Montreal versus learning global English in China. In Montreal, Gardner's model makes total sense, right? There is a clear physical target community right outside your door for you to integrate into. But global English in China? In a heavily globalized world, English is an international language. There just isn't one single target community anymore. As researchers noted, the whole integrative metaphor just kind of falls apart here. We desperately needed a new way to understand what actually fuels us. Which brings us to section 2, meet your possible selves. To solve this language motivation problem, researchers like Dörnyei actually stopped looking at traditional linguistics and pivoted straight into mainstream psychology. I absolutely love this quote from psychologist Hazel Marcus. The space of what might be is a uniquely human domain that is still to be fully mapped. This was a total game changer. It was the moment self-theory and motivation theory finally crossed paths. Instead of treating motivation like some static personality trait you're just born with, researchers started looking at the sheer power of human imagination. And that led Marcus and Nurius to introduce this incredible concept back in 1986 called possible selves. Think of these as dynamic, forward-pointing conceptions of what we might become, what we would like to become, and, super importantly, what we are afraid of becoming. They aren't just thoughts about the past. They act as future self-guides. They literally pull us into the future. Motivation, then, is really just about bridging the gap between who you are right now, today, and those vivid future identities. Let's break those down in section 3, ideal, oughts, and feared. To understand how these selves actually manipulate our daily actions, keep us studying when we'd rather be doing literally anything else, we can look at Torrey Higgins's self-discrepancy theory. He categorizes 3 distinct types of selves. The ideal self is who you want to be. It's your hopes and aspirations. Then you have the ought self, which represents who you feel you should be, your duties, obligations, and the expectations others have for you. And finally, the feared self. These are your absolute worst-case scenarios, the person you are terrified of becoming. Basically, we measure our current selves against these 3 standards every single day. Now, this distinction is absolutely critical because they generate completely different types of psychological fuel. The ideal self operates on a promotion focus. It's all about approaching pleasure, seeking growth, achieving those big dreams. It pulls you forward with joy. The ought self, though, that operates on a prevention focus. It's all about avoiding pain, not letting your parents or your boss down, just dodging negative outcomes. It pushes you forward out of pure obligation. All right, moving on to section 4, the power of imagination. So how do we actually activate these selves? Well, this is where we leave the dry academic theory behind and look at the actual mechanics of your brain. And believe it or not, we can look all the way back to ancient wisdom to understand this. Aristotle famously said there's no desiring without imagination. From the ancient Greeks right up to modern cognitive scientists, mental imagery has been recognized as the prime motivating force in human action. You simply cannot genuinely desire a goal if you can't clearly picture it in your head. And crazy enough, modern neuroimaging proves Aristotle was spot on. When you generate visual mental imagery, it activates about 2/3 of the exact same brain areas as actual visual perception. Just think about that for a second. When you vividly imagine your future self effortlessly speaking a foreign language in a cafe in Rome, your brain literally experiences it as reality. It's this intense mental imagery that translates abstract goals into instrumental, real-world actions. We actually see this applied perfectly in sports psychology. I mean, virtually every successful Olympic athlete uses mental imagery. They don't just set a vague goal to win. They visualize the smell of the stadium, the exact physical sensation of their routine, the feeling of stepping up onto that podium. The future self has to be seen, heard, and felt. And if you're a language learner, you have to do the exact same thing. You need to deeply see and hear your future fluent self. That imagination builds a durable piece of your consciousness that keeps you going when the training gets grueling. Let's bring it all together in Section 5, making your motivation work. This is where all this theory builds into an actual, evidence-based toolkit you can apply to your own learning goals today. Because researchers found that motivation doesn't just magically trigger just because you want something. You actually need these 6 necessary conditions for your future self-guides to work. 1. Elaborate the visual image. 2. Make sure the goal is actually plausible. 3. Harmonize what you want to do with what you have to do. 4. Actively remind yourself of the goal. 5. Create procedural strategies. And 6. Offset the dream with a feared self. But let's zoom in on a couple of the absolute most vital steps here. I really want to emphasize condition number 5, procedural strategies. Because look, a vivid image without a roadmap is really just an empty fantasy. Just like that Olympian needs a coach and a daily training plan, you need concrete daily habits. You have to set specific proximal sub-goals. Those small daily tasks that logically link your present reality to your glorious ideal self. If you just dream but don't plan the daily steps, that motivation is going to evaporate fast. And our final massive takeaway is what's known as the additive motivation effect. Researchers Oysterman and Marcus found that you actually get the maximum possible motivational energy when you combine your hoped-for ideal self with your feared self. So imagine the absolute joy of getting top marks on a proficiency test, right? Now balance that with the panic of failing and missing your deadline. Balancing your beautiful, vivid dream with a healthy, grounded dose of fear about failing, that creates the ultimate engine for human action. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I have a challenge for you. Stop relying on vague, undefined goals. Start actively designing and visualizing your future. Ask yourself right now, what does your ideal future self actually look, sound, and feel like? Build that image. Map out your daily steps. Throw in a little bit of healthy fear of failure, and you'll find a well of motivation you never even knew you had. Keep learning, keep visualizing, and I'll see you next time.